Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. On this episode, we set our gaze southward to the ever-complex, endlessly fascinating South Caucasus, where Turkey is flexing some major geopolitical muscle. Where exactly, you might ask? Well, the South Caucasus, a region perpetually caught between turbulence and transition, finds itself once again at geopolitical crossroads. As Turkey steps into the spotlight, balancing NATO commitments, European aspirations, and newfound friendships in the East, questions swirl about Ankara's true intentions and the stabilities of its strategy. Can Turkey bridge the divide in a historically fractured region, or will domestic turbulence derail its ambitious foreign policy? Well, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
The day the Soviet Union collapsed changed the destiny of the South Caucasus region. 3 small states emerged from the mire of Moscow's faltering shadow, yet their newfound freedom and existence meant that new powers could also have a role to play in this part of the world. Turkey is one of them. Ankara immediately launched its bid for influence over the South Caucasus. Turkey vies for influence here against Russia, the EU, and to a lesser extent, the United States. Turkey's closest ally in the region is Azerbaijan. Statements like these by the Turkish president are not uncommon.
With the end of the occupation in Karabakh, a historic window of opportunity for lasting peace in our region has opened. This window of opportunity mustn't be closed.
Azerbaijan's greatest rival in the region is Armenia. This of course immediately pits Yerevan against Ankara, and Armenian leadership has its own ideas of what Turkey wants from the South Caucasus.
Turkey has come to the South Caucasus to continue the policy which it is carrying out in the Mediterranean against Greece and Cyprus, or in Libya, or in Syria, or in Iraq.
Turkey, however, has also presented itself as a guarantor of stability in the region. In the past, it has been at the forefront of various initiatives and projects, like the 2000 Stability Pact of the Caucasus and the so-called 3+3 format in 2022. The latter in particular is meant to be a forum for all parties immediately interested in the region to voice their concerns. Interestingly, while it involves Turkey itself, Russia and Iran, it does not include any Western power. Even in the case of a project like this, Ankara makes a point by showing how it underscores its own regional ambitions.
And now let's zone in on the East-plaining portion of our show. Since it gains its independence in the wake of the Soviet Union's fall, Armenia has been striving to normalize its relation with Turkey. In recent years, Yerevan has been pushing towards this goal with renewed vigor, as it seeks to diversify its partnerships and move away from Russia.
One of the deepest shadows hanging over any sort of normalization between Turkey and Armenia is the Armenian genocide carried out by the Turkish state's predecessor, the Ottoman Empire, in the early 20th century. To this day, Turkey does not recognize this genocide and has criticized states that do so. Nonetheless, there have been attempts at reconciliation. The closest they came to normalization was in 2009, when the two sides signed protocols concerning opening borders and establishing diplomatic relations. Turkey never ratified these, however, under pressure from Azerbaijan. Following the conquest of Nagorno-Karabakh by Baku, however, Armenia has been looking to diversify its security as it sees Russia as an inefficient guarantor, starting with its own backyard. While there have been several meetings between Turkish and Armenian officials, no concrete deals have been reached. Ankara, for its part, has said that a peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan must first be reached before Yerevan can normalize its relations with Turkey.
And now let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Last month in The Hague, a city known more for trials of war criminals than peace conferences, Links Europe gathered the best and brightest to discuss the South Caucasus again in transition. Professor Miltad Çalikapala from Kadir Has University in Istanbul kicked things off by highlighting Turkey's growing clout. Ankara's approach to South Caucasus involved the 3+3 initiative. That's 3 countries from the South Caucasus and 3 regional powers, Russia, Iran, and Turkey itself. Georgia, of course, is sitting this stance out because after you've had tanks roll into your territory, casual geopolitical talks kind of lose their charm. Turkey's relationship with Azerbaijan is super tight. Now, these two nations have been inseparable allies for decades. Meanwhile, Turkey's dealings with Armenia are about as smooth as a ride on a 50-year-old car with square wheels, slow, bumpy, and occasionally stuck. After earthquakes in Turkey, humanitarian corridors did briefly open, suggesting that disaster diplomacy could work. Johnny Melikian from Armenia's Arbeli Center underscored this, urging Turkey to seize the moment for full normalization. Unfortunately, Turkey's hesitation to finalize the Armenia-Azerbaijan peace agreement is about as frustrating as waiting for a politician to keep a promise. It might happen, but you're advised not to hold your breath. Mamen Aliyev from Azerbaijan reminded everyone of Turkey's long-standing regional role dating back to the 1990s. Turkey is too geopolitically ambitious, but also too historically entwined, and too geographically close to ignore the Caucasus. Even the EU has to grudgingly admit that Turkey is indispensable here. Now, Turkey's to-do list for the immediate future is clear. Normalize relations with Armenia immediately because border closures are so 20th century. Now, acknowledge that the South Caucasus matters significantly to the EU, meaning a high-level EU-Turkey dialogue is overdue, and please reconsider the outdated 3+3 format. Right now, it is giving less strategic brilliance and more awkward family reunion with some members missing. Turkey's role in the South Caucasus is changing and growing. Their strategy is historically prominent, impactful, but always leaving room for improvement. From normalizing tense relations with Armenia to redefining regional alliances, Turkey is quickly becoming indispensable in this historically turbulent area. As for the countries of the South Caucasus, hopefully they know how to play their cards, because in geopolitics, as in life, you can't always choose your neighbors, but you better learn how to manage them. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Dr. Conrad Jasov, lecturer at the Faculty of Oriental Studies, University of Warsaw, and Academic Center for Strategic Communication. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hello.
So today we're trying to unpack the ever-complicated geopolitics of the South Caucasus and Turkey. Can you first help us understand where they stand right now, and how's Turkey's relation with the South Caucasus?
It's a period of serious and significant changes in the region of South Caucasus, starting from the at least from the 2020 war, Armenia-Azerbaijan war about the Nagorno-Karabakh region, won by Azerbaijan, and later the Russian invasion to Ukraine started. So these two events meant that Russia, which used to be kind of a dominant power in the region, now it's rather much more weaker and has weaker hand, for example, comparing to Turkey, which is growing stronger, mostly because of its alliance with Baku, with Azerbaijan. Just to remind you that these are two Turkic nations, so similar cultures, similar languages, so they are closely cooperating. They were closely cooperating during the war in Nagorno-Karabakh, and they are still the most important allies in the region. So obviously the difficult situation is for Armenia.
Yeah.
For Armenia, which was the loser in this conflict, which used to be ally of Russia, and formally it is still an ally of Russia in the organization called Collective Security Treaty Organization. But everyone knows in the region, in Central Asia, in South Caucasus, and elsewhere in the post-Soviet Union, that this organization doesn't function properly. In fact, Armenia is alone in the region. Armenia is backed by the European Union, but this, let's say, presence of the European Union in the region is quite symbolic. So there's a mission, European Union monitoring mission in Armenia, EUMA, but these are like more than 100 observers monitoring the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And actually, Azerbaijan is not very happy with this solution. So there used to be some kind of threats from Baku and pressure on Armenia and above European Union to quit this mission, but so far there are plans to extend this mission. Yes, and I think it's important because what we saw in recent years, there were some clashes on the border of Armenia and Azerbaijan, and even some events when Azeri forces went quite deep into the territory of Armenia. So the situation is volatile. It's definitely there is a need of some kind of international monitoring in this region.
Right, like you mentioned, a lot of those foreign presence in Armenia right now are, well, pretty much just standing there, not really doing as much as it probably could. Do you think that that would leave some sort of power vacuum for international players like Turkey, for example, to move in?
Well, when we speak about Turkey, as I mentioned, Turkey and Azerbaijan, they are allies, and someone might think, looking at the map, Turkey is a big country with a big army, of course, the second army in NATO. Azerbaijan is the biggest country in the South Caucasus region, but it's of course much smaller in terms of population, economy, and military power than Turkey. But the reality is actually that Turkey is always listening to Baku and doing only the things Baku allows to do. So now we see the process of rapprochement between Turkey and Armenia. So Armenia is eager to open the border, which is closed since 1993, since the first Karabakh war, when Turkey closed the border in solidarity with Azerbaijan fighting the Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. And at this moment, I would say that both Turkey and Armenia, they're open to do this, to open the border, to re-establish diplomatic relations, but still Ankara is listening to Baku. So Ankara is waiting for the green light from Baku, and only after this probably the border will be finally opened. Yes, and this is of course dependent on the peace treaty between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So this peace treaty is already negotiated, but Azerbaijan has some additional demands from Armenia. So one of the most important demands is to make some changes in the constitution of Armenia, because the constitution of Armenia mentions the land of Nagorno-Karabakh, which is a part of Azerbaijan, and also the mountain of Ararat, which is close to the border with Armenia, but this is part of territory of Turkey. So Azerbaijan says that we are afraid of this kind of mentions in the Armenian constitution, so that may mean some kind of territorial claims in the future. So they are pushing Armenia to change the constitution.
Can you help us understand why Turkey is so reliant on Azerbaijan to make these sort of geopolitical decisions, and whether or not Turkey have its own interest in pursuing a better relationship with Armenia despite Azerbaijan's potential rejection?
Well, I would say that there are several reasons. First one I already mentioned, so there is this kind of Turkic solidarity, similar culture, similar religion, ethnic background, language. So they say that these are, Azeris and Turks, they say these are two states but one nation. But this is one important issue. Another is economy, of course. So Azerbaijan is exporting a lot of hydrocarbons to Turkey, including oil, including gas. Also investing a lot in Turkish economy. So Turkish economy is going through very serious problems in recent recent years. So it desperately needs investment, and some of this investment come from Azerbaijan. This is very important for for the government in Ankara. So, as I said, paradoxically, one may think that Turkey is a bigger country which decides about the fate of the region, but paradoxically, it's Azerbaijan which is more important in this situation.
It's actually very interesting. Now, coming from the Armenia's perspective, do you think that with Russia preoccupied with its presence in Ukraine, not being able to kind of take care of them anymore, they will also have their own interest in seeking out new partners?
Well, yes. Recently we saw a visit of Foreign Minister, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov to Armenia. So it seems that after this period when Armenia was seriously disappointed with the stance of Russia, I mean Russia didn't help at all in this conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan about Nagorno-Karabakh, but Russia also did nothing when Azerbaijani forces entered the territory of proper Armenia. So it showed that this alliance with Russia means actually nothing. And the other thing is that Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan is a pro-Western politician, so he's trying to have this rapprochement with the European Union, to have Armenia closer to European Union, even to United States, to NATO countries, which is of course something very bad from the point of view of Moscow. So there were serious tensions in recent years. Armenia was claiming that it's going to quit the CSTO. But so far it's still a member of this organization, and this visit, Lavrov's visit, it shows that Russia is trying maybe to somehow repair this relationship, although it's still tense, I would say.
Right, and like you mentioned, geopolitics in this area is ever changing. Where do you see things go from this point on?
Well, we should mention also the third country in the region of South Caucasus, which is Georgia, which used to be the country which was closest to the West, closest to the European Union, the country which was the only country actually in the region planning to join NATO. But at the moment, the Georgian Dream government, which is accused of forging the elections, falsifying the elections last year, and of course there are serious problems with democracy now, with a lot of legislation in Georgia, which is similar to authoritarian legislation in the Russian Federation, which is a blow to democracy, to non-governmental organizations, to the opposition. So there are those constant protests since December last year. So we can say that although Russia is generally losing in the region, in this case, in the Georgian case, Russian influence is becoming paradoxically stronger.
Thank you so much for your input and insight in helping us unpack this really complicated relationship. And thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Cheers. And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz says Ukraine will no longer be restricted when it comes to using Western long-range missiles. There previously had been reservations about Ukraine using the equipment to strike Russian bases within Russian proper.
According to the German Chancellor, neither the UK, France, the US nor Germany is maintaining any range restrictions on the weapons they have provided. This issue has been a hot topic between Kiev and its partners ever since Russia launched its invasion in 2022. Initially, Western allies had restricted the use of long-range systems to targets within the parts of Ukraine that are under Russian occupation. In 2024, however, after reports surfaced about the presence of North Korean soldiers taking part in the fighting on the side of Moscow, Washington and London authorized strikes against targets on Russian soil. At the time, Vladimir Putin had condemned this decision and claimed that it would mean NATO was at war with the Russian Federation. In response, the Kremlin broadened Russia's nuclear doctrine. This involved authorizing the use of nuclear weapons in response to large-scale conventional attacks or attacks by non-nuclear states backed by nuclear powers.
Austria is deporting Chechen asylum seekers back to Russia. This comes despite warnings by international organizations that these individuals could be forcibly mobilized by Russia to fight in Ukraine.
Austria has deported 2 Chechen men who had applied for asylum after they received military draft notices from Russian authorities. Austria argues that since both men were over the age of 30, they were not under a credible threat of conscription, since that only applies to men aged between 18 to 30. Authorities in Vienna said that the men could avoid mobilization by relocating to Moscow. They also believe that the men posed a threat based on police investigations into terrorism and religious extremism. International organizations like Amnesty International have repeatedly condemned European countries for their deportations of asylum seekers. Chechen exiles have also voiced their opposition, saying that they are being unfairly linked to religious extremism.
The right-hand man of Georgian billionaire Bidzina Ivanishvili has fled the country in fear of his life. Georgi Bakyashvili has worked for the man who is believed to be Georgia's de facto ruler for more than a decade.
Bidzina Ivanishvili is a reclusive billionaire who serves as the honorary chair of the ruling Georgian Dream Party. He is also widely regarded as the real power behind Georgian authorities. His goals remain shrouded in mystery, and not many people can claim to understand his inner workings. One person, however, seems to have been very close to this mysterious figure. Bakyashvili had helped his boss in many different sectors, including the sale of his Russian assets, which were seen as an obstacle to electoral success in 2012 in the wake of Russia's 2008 invasion of Georgia. Several years later, a large-sum Bitcoin deal and personal tensions surrounding Georgia's relations with Russia post-Ukraine war led to Bakyashvili being put on criminal trial. The man claims the trial was a foregone conclusion and that the laundering and theft accusations against him were extortion. He fled Georgia in secret as he was destined to be sentenced to 11 years in jail.
And that's all on this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.